Good morning, boys and girls. Hope you had a great weekend. And I'm about to read the next chapter of The Whipping Boy. Do you remember what happened last? When the bear poked his head out of the stagecoach window and the king's men rode off, not discovering Jemmy and the prince? This is called Chapter 18 of Assorted Events in which the plot thickens thicker. This is, I think, the longest chapter, so be patient while I read. I hope you enjoy it. It starts off on page 63 and it ends on page 74. So, how many pages do you think I'm going to have to read? Pause and figure that out. Remember to text or email me the answer. And if you want a real math challenge, you could add 63 and 74 together. Do you need a pencil and paper, or can you use mental math to figure that out? Let me know your strategy. Here we go. As soon as the wheels rattled on cobbled streets, Jemmy felt an immense sense of relief. This was his turf, the city, and he knew more places to hide than a rat. Approaching the waterside fairgrounds, he saw prisoners in chains being marched aboard a convict ship. It lay in sharp contrast to the festive stalls and the banners of the fair. Contrast. What does that mean? And what would a convict be? Who would go on to a convict ship? Not shrimp, ship. Captain Nips eased the coach between a cellar of live fowl and a juggler tossing colored balls into the bright noonday air. Thanks for the jolly ride, Hot Potato Man, said Betsy. Come along, Petunia. Let's fetch us a crowd and earn a copper or two. What's copper? And what does that mean? Jemmy collected his battered birdcage. Don't rush off, said Captain Nips, hauling out a canvas load of firewood from under the seat. Ain't I been listening to your stomachs rumbling and bumbling for the last hour? Do me the kindness of filling up the kettle at the pump. Soon as the potatoes are boiled up, we'll feast, eh? Anxious as he was to be on his way, Jemmy hesitated. He was powerful hungry. Then Captain Nips laid a coin in his hand. And while you're at it, stop off at the cow lady, the both of you, and get yourselves a couple of mugs to drink. What would you get to drink from a cow lady? Jemmy picked up the handle of the kettle, but almost at once Prince Brat snatched it out of his hands. I'll do that. You, Jemmy replied. It's servant's work. Then who'd take me for a prince toting water? He smiled. He laughed. I've never been allowed to carry anything. Nothing. Not in my entire life. Jemmy led the way. He'd never regarded fetching and carrying as a privilege. Princes and such like were hard to fathom. Privilege. Fathom. What do those words mean? But the sound of merriment lingered in his head. He'd never heard Prince Brat laugh before. They dodged acrobats and a stilt walker and a harp player. Through the hubbub came a great squeaky voice. Jemmy? Rat catchin' Jemmy? Turning, Jemmy spied a tall boy wearing a checked cap. It was Smudge, tending a sawdust pit squared off by a board fence. A dog and rat pit. Beside him stood a stack of rat-filled cages and a black terrier puppy leashed to a post. Do you remember us talking about how in the olden days they used to have cats and dogs and animals and rats and fight each other, and they'd make bets on who would win? And do you remember what we decide as a society now when we think about animals and how they should be treated? By gigs, it is you, Jemmy, said Smudge. Reckon you call the king by his first name these days. Hello, Smudge. You give up mudlarkin'? I've come up in the world, ain't I? Same as you, Jemmy. How do you like my dog? Best rat fighter you ever saw. With a practiced eye, Jemmy surveyed the cages. But those rats look tame enough to eat off your hand. Best I could afford. Catch me some castle rats and I'll make a special feature. The king's own rats. Not my line of work in the castle, Smudge. It's not true you're a whipping boy, is it? Jemmy felt a flush of embarrassment and dodged the question. What does that mean to dodge a question? Well, I've learned to read and write. Nah. The bottom truth, I've read many a book from beginning to end. What's in 'em? All nature of things. I can do sums, too. I asked you to do a sum at the beginning of this story, do you remember? A sum of two numbers? Smudge was impressed. Ain't that a wonder? I never heard of a rat catcher that could read and write and do sums. It don't fit. Don't forget your old friends when you grow up to be a duke or something. I aim to go back to the sewer, said Jemmy. I'll catch you some rats first chance. But even as he said it, Jemmy felt a bleak discomfort. He would miss the shelves of books he'd left behind in the castle. In the sewers, he hadn't been aware of his own ignorance. He saw no choice now but to return, but he realized that he'd lost his taste for ignorance. Now, sometimes nowadays, people say you're being ignorant. What does that mean? And what did it mean in this book when Jemmy says he now knows he was ignorant and didn't want to go back to ignorance? What does that mean? Smudge was saying, "Who's the cove?" "What? Your pal." That is, Jemmy caught himself. He began to stammer. This is, the prince answered for him. "Friend of Jemmy's the name." "Then friend of Jemmy'll do." Smudge put out his hand to shake. Jemmy caught Prince Brat's momentary confusion. Because princes don't touch, so you can't shake a prince's hand. "Oh, he doesn't shake hands." "Of course I do," said the prince with a quick grin. He took Smudge's hand. "Glad to shake your hand, Smudge." "Likewise." And Jemmy dragged the prince away. Smudge had committed a terrible offense. No one was allowed to shake hands with a prince. "Why did you do that?" "Well, because I've never shaken hands before." "He could get hung for less than that." The prince was staring at his hand. Felt friendly, trusting. I might introduce that practice at court when I become the king. Jemmy's ears pricked up. King, is it? He thought. So it was just bluster that you're never going back to the castle. Ugh, I hope you don't want to learn how to catch rats first. Moments later they came to a stout old woman with hands as gnarled as tree roots. Beside her, munching grass, stood a cow with a brass ring in its nose. What would that be for? "New milk," the cow lady called out. "New milk! Fresh from the cow, best in the land! New milk!" Jemmy handed over the coin. The milk lady fished 2 mugs out of a tub of water, sat on a stool, and began to milk that cow directly into the mugs. Her aim was as skilled as an archer's. What is an archer? "Have you heard the earful?" she asked. "Our prince has abdicated. Imagine! Abducted! Imagine!" "Imagine," said the prince coldly. She was looking directly at him. "Our darling poor king, weeping his royal's eyes out, no doubt, though why he'd spring a tear for that little toad, I don't know. A mighty terror, they say he is. Prince Brat, they say he is. Pity the day he becomes king, hey?" She handed over the pair of mugs. Jemmy drank the warm milk down in unbroken gulp, gulp, gulp. But then he noticed the prince standing, motionless, a vague, unseeing look in his eyes. For certain, he knew everyone called him Prince Brat behind his back, didn't he? "Drink up, lad," said the cow lady. "My stars, I've never seen such rags on a boy. They look like cast-offs from the old clothes man." She gave out a joking laugh. "Drink up before you scare off all my business." The prince drained the mug and shuffled away. As they filled the potato kettle at the pump, he looked at Jemmy. Treasonous old woman. I could have her tongue ripped out for lying. But there was no steam in his voice. Taking a whipping was bad enough, but to learn that all your subjects that you'd one day rule over and be king over dreaded you and hated you, that shook him up. "She didn't mean any harm," Jemmy muttered, keeping his eyes alert for soldiers. Is that what they actually call me, Prince Brat?" Jemmy nodded. "Does everyone hate me?" "More than likely. What about you?" Jemmy hesitated for a moment. "Well, I did. But maybe I don't." Jemmy couldn't sort out his feelings. "The pot's full. Let's go." It took the 2 of them to carry the iron kettle, now full of water. Things get heavier when you put water in them. They passed a magician with a bald head, a street fiddler, and an umbrella seller. His wares opened around him like black silken mushrooms. Suddenly there loomed up on a soldier on horseback, his eyes on the search. There was nothing to do but brazen it out. Jemmy took a tighter grip on the handle, but was ready to fly if he had to. The soldier passed by with only the merest glance. What was he looking for? A prince in fine vests and a crown cocked on his head? That means slightly tilted. Was it clothes that made a man a prince? Jemmy wondered. Just like street rags make you a street boy? He had a notion that the prince picture. He had a notion that the prince felt secretly disappointed not to be recognized by any of his subjects. Wasn't he getting his head stuffed full of surprises? Before long, potatoes were boiling in the pot. Not far off, Betsy had drawn a crowd with Petunia now balancing a gentleman's hat on his nose. And then the bear began passing the hat for tips. So there's some words you might not be familiar with there. Tips. Drawn. What else? Merest. The merest glance. Think about those. Jemmy no longer felt the slightest concern about the soldiers. He had no doubt that Hold-Your-Nose Billy would trace him and the prince to the fair. Hadn't they fallen into company with a girl with a trained bear? Where else would they be going? Finally, Captain Nips began spearing boiled potatoes. Spearing boiled potatoes. Do you see the spear? Remember spear and sphere, the conversation we had when we were doing geometrical solids? What's the difference between a spear and a sphere? Tell your parents. We could eat a bushel full of those, Betsy exclaimed, jingling a handful of coins she'd gotten from her bear act. Courtesy to the fellow artist, said Captain Nips, refusing the money. He didn't want her to pay for those potatoes. He split open a pair of plump potatoes. Salt and pepper? Yes, please, for me. Pepper for me and salt for Petunia. Captain Nips reached into one coat pocket for a pinch of salt, right out of the pocket, and into the other coat pocket for a pinch of pepper. Just like that. Salt for me, said Jemmy. And you? Captain Nips asked the prince. The heir to the throne balked for a moment. B-A-L-K-E-D. Balked. What do you think that means? The heir to the throne, Prince Brat, balked for a moment. And Jemmy knew why. He'd certainly never eaten a potato before in the castle. Roots were considered peasant food. Do you remember when we talked about parts of a plant that you eat? You eat part of the roots, you eat part of the stem, you eat the leaves, and sometimes the flower. Can you and your family think of some vegetables that you eat the root part of, the stem part of, and the leaf part of? Is there any plant that you can eat the whole thing, root, stem, and leaves? Back to the book. I don't know, the prince stammered. When in doubt, pick salt, Captain Nips chuckled. And then he began calling out to the passing crowd, hot, hot, hot potatoes, Captain Nips, hot, hot potatoes. Jemmy gorged himself, anxious to be off and not certain when he would eat again. The prince nibbled at first with his fingers. And then he threw his royal pride to the winds and he bit the whole thing off in giant mouthfuls. A ballad seller was working his way through the crowd, crying out his wares. He waved a bamboo pole with a long paper streamer fluttering from the tip. 3 yards of song a copper! Old songs, new songs, sing 'em yourself. 10 verses of the poor, pitiful Polly will make you weep. 16 verses of that notable highwayman, Hold-Your-Nose Billy. Jemmy's ears pricked up as he heard the ballad singer begin singing a sample of his merchandise. Yeah, you can pause it on that verse. And if you want, you can come up with your own tune and email me you singing that song. If you sing it to me, I promise to send you an email singing it back to you. The street song had once amused Jemmy, but now he only sharpened his eyes. He wiped his hands on his sleeves and turned to Captain Nips. Thanks for the grub, sir. Where are we off to? Asked Betsy. Here's the place to put a jingle in your pockets.